Hi, I'm Dani Castellano, and this is Diet Culture, the podcast where sometimes I interview amazing people and professionals in the field of healing relationships with food, and sometimes I chat with my brother and fellow human who also hates diet culture, Nick. We talk about diet culture, a systemic and oppressive force in all of our lives that wastes our time at best and destroys livelihood at worst. We dissect the problems, share stories, and give suggestions on where we can all go from here. This podcast is for informational, educational, and inspirational purposes only, and never a substitution for individual medical or nutritional advice. Nick is with me today to talk about preparing for the holiday ahead this week for Thanksgiving, first recognizing some of the ways that diet culture comes into play, and talking through that a little bit, and then how to navigate setting some boundaries around the food and body talk that come up, and ways to extend ourselves some compassion in this process, really no matter where we're coming from. And also a quick announcement. Next week, episode 25 will be the last installment of season 1 for the Diet Culture podcast, because I am due to have a baby the first week of January. And so I'm taking this last stretch of my pregnancy to just be ready for this experience of becoming a mom, and then enjoying spending time with my baby, and we will resume episodes for season 2 in the spring of 2022. Hey, Nick.
Hey, Dan. How's it going?
Pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing good. A few more days, and then I get some days off for the holiday, so I'm excited about that.
Good. That's awesome. I will be working, but I wanted to work the holiday because I'm trying to get that time and a half before the baby comes.
Gotcha. Well, that's good.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Thanksgiving / holiday eating and how diet culture shows up and boundaries we can set, and just really my goal isn't to come in and be like, this is what you have to do, but just talking about the bullshit really that ensues this time of year thanks to our friend diet culture, in addition to holidays already being very difficult for people a lot of times, and just kind of talk through some things so that people feel less alone for any of this stuff that comes up that feels relatable. And I know, especially for anyone working through recovery from an eating disorder, this is a particularly rough time around food and bodies, and just wanting to kind of name that it's tough for people for a lot of reasons in general. Before we get any deeper into talking about how diet culture shows up around the holidays, I wanted to read something from the guest that I had on last week, Dr. Hortensia Jimenez. So if anyone hasn't listened to that episode, I would really encourage you to go back and give it a listen, because she was really super lovely to chat with and has so many important things to share. But this is from her Instagram page on November 15th. So, November is Native American Heritage Month, as well as the month in which many people in the United States celebrate Thanksgiving. Just as we embark in the efforts to dismantle toxic diet culture narratives around food, especially during the holidays, we also need to combat the harmful narratives around Thanksgiving. While Thanksgiving is a day for people to get together as a family and give thanks, it is also for many Indigenous communities a time of grief, given the historical violence, forced displacement, and current issues and struggles around inadequate health care, violence against women, protecting sacred sites, poverty, and unemployment, to name a few. Dismantling diet culture is dismantling settler colonial belief systems about Thanksgiving. It's about having honest and courageous conversations so that we can continue to heal and be in good relation with one another and with our cultural foods and food ways. I encourage you to check all my relations podcast at AMR Podcast, hosted by Project_562, Native Apropes, and Dr. Des, in which they interview Wampanoag scholars Paula Peters and Linda Combs, who share with us a story of Thanksgiving from an Indigenous perspective. So if anyone wants to dig a little bit deeper into that, I would encourage it. I think it's something that I'm learning more and more about, and having those conversations. I really appreciate Dr. Jimenez for sharing that and for the work that she does. I think we can't talk about the holidays, especially Thanksgiving, without acknowledging there's a lot more to the conversation. Okay. So I think that there's a lot of fear around the holidays for most people, because of how much, I want to say weight, but I'm not trying to be punny here, but how much weight is placed on the concern around weight gain during the holidays. And I think it starts with Halloween really being like a holiday where there's a lot of candy being eaten and there's all kinds of toxic narratives around that. And then a month later, we have Thanksgiving approaching, and just a lot of nonsense around information being provided about how to do the holiday in a quote unquote healthy way. Um, when I was preparing for this episode, I was just kind of like doing my thing where I Google to see what comes up around this kind of stuff. And I searched Thanksgiving weight gain because I wanted to see, like, if there's a lot of new articles coming out with concern about that. Luckily, there wasn't a whole lot of brand new content. A lot of it was from the past several years, but I didn't see a ton of articles pop up from 2021, which made me really happy. I feel like that, I mean, part of it's how you Google things, but I feel like that combination could have definitely provided um, more current content, and it didn't, so that made me really happy. But this was just what popped up as the very top featured thing from WebMD, that Thanksgiving is the official start of the holiday party season, and restrictive diets can make this time of year grueling. But it's also the time when most of us gain an extra 1 to 3 pounds that unfortunately tend to become permanent baggage. So I just wanted to take that as a moment to point out that if we're concerned about 1 to 3 pounds of weight gain, that's truly not enough to notice a difference on your body. And it's a really sad reason to be engaging in disordered eating. I think the fear really gets inserted here that it unfortunately tends to become permanent baggage. And I also wanted to remind people that we're not meant to weigh the same forever throughout our entire lives. And so there are going to be periods of time where we're going to weigh more and we may not lose that weight, and that's normal. And it's a part of being a human being. So, just kind of calling some truth to some of those things that pop up and get said just really unnecessarily, and just highlight to me how much we care about weight and being thin as possible. And it's a really big bummer that that gets tied into holidays, because I hope for us that we can um, have that time mean more than just trying to survive it without gaining any weight. Okay, so my next little uh, article I want to talk about here is from Googling healthy Thanksgiving recipes. And an article, like a lot of recipes come up, and some of them are for things like people following a gluten-free diet or things like that, which are not inherently related to diet culture necessarily. It really depends on the person, or like more vegetarian options. So I'm not adding anyone who is choosing to do something with nutrition that's outside of the norm. But I think our intentions really matter with that. But this article of a ton of recipes from the Pioneer Woman was saying that basically these recipes will make it easy to eat a little lighter this year. If you're worried your guests will miss out on something delicious, you can relax. These ideas are full of fresh flavors and blah blah blah, and like instead of heavy potatoes, opt for a cauliflower mash. And I this is not new. Cauliflower has been around for several years in the sense of trying to replace a lot of other carbohydrates, and I just want to give some permission and compassion to anyone who feels like they have to eat um, cauliflower instead of potatoes, because it's the healthier and lower calorie choice that you can eat the real thing. Um, and if you love cauliflower genuinely, that's great too. I feel like that's probably not happening as often as we say it is, and that is me speaking from my experience of things that I used to think tasted really good when I was extremely disordered and in my eating disorder. And it's just interesting how over time, like certainly there are lots of things that are lovely, that are a variety of calories and all of that. But like certain products and ideas that were like, oh, this is better than that. And I just want to encourage people to take a moment to think about, is that actually true, or is there potentially a reason I'm doing that? And in this instance, it's to save calories, and just kind of coming back to the root of like, why do we feel like that's the thing that we have to do all the time?
Yeah, I would like to encourage anybody in a less serious way to eat cauliflower as just cauliflower, because I think cauliflower is delightful. But I I just don't I just think it's peculiar when we do the use this food as this food thing. Um, I don't like mashing cauliflower, or substituting it for other things. So please come after me if you are a huge cauliflower substitute fan. But I just definitely, that is one of those practices that's very peculiar to me, is the substitutions.
Yeah, and I think it's peculiar because we're doing it to save calories most of the time. And like
Yeah,
there is the instance of genuinely needing to avoid gluten or having an allergy or something like that, and that is not diet culture. It's just like, where is that underlying intention coming from? Because it's really easy to get mixed up in that, especially with really good marketing. So yeah. All right. So I want to talk about a few of the other ways that diet culture shows up in holiday eating. Um, so there's like a lot in the anti-diet space and like recovery space of seeing things like you don't have to earn your food or earn your calories, and I think that that is a good reminder, especially because of the turkey trots that happen on Thanksgiving. And I think we have to talk really carefully about this because there's 100% nothing wrong with engaging in movement and getting outside and getting fresh air. It's again just coming back to those intentions and being self-protective, because if you're someone who's in the thick of an eating disorder or healing that relationship with food, that may not be genuinely the most supportive thing for you to get up and have to um, move in that way before eating a meal just because of the association that it can have of like knowing that you're burning a lot of calories. It's really where your headspace is at because it's going to be the same thing either way. But it's if it matters to you if you do it or not, in the sense of like only being able to truly have what you want to eat that day, if you have burnt off the calories versus it being truly like joyful movement. Um, and it just having an honest conversation with yourself. And if you feel like you're being pressured to burn off calories, like I can think back to when I was a member of a particular spin studio before COVID, there was always talk from the instructors about how we are burning off the calories from brunch or like from all these things that happened. And so I know that a lot of times in the fitness space that really gets amplified about it being like a pro to the other things that might be beneficial, like donating money to a really good cause or spending time with family, that you're also burning off these calories. And um, you also would be burning off calories if you sat on your couch sipping coffee that morning because our bodies are constantly in need and using energy. So just a reminder, I'm never adding anyone for engaging in physical activity if it's coming from a place that's supportive of well-being. Um, I just, of course, am going to have that lens of holding a lot of curiosity around it because of how often it's being used in such a self-detrimental way.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that too because I was thinking about that. I came after Orange Theory pretty hard 2 weeks ago, and so I wanted to say that exact same thing. That like, I there is nothing wrong with that. I'm not trying to attack anybody or make them feel
Mhm.
attacked. It just is just keep in tune with your head.
Yeah, and I think there's gonna be a lot of inevitable, adding in this podcast, just inherently, but I do find it important to say, like, the reasons. It's not because it's just to, like, come and shit on people, but just how certain things come into play, and how common they are and how much access those types of conversations and uh, behavior encouragement is for people.
Yeah, yeah, and please feel free to comment if we ever say anything that's goofy like that. Like I was just thinking when I was dissing cauliflower, I have a friend that is allergic to potatoes. So obviously you are very clear to mash up cauliflower, buddy. That is not
Yeah,
an
and I
attack on
hope
you.
that that's funny. I really hope that that is like an understood, like we will likely continue to touch on that because I think it's important in communicating in a one way message like this to be very clear about your intentions and the point behind your conversation. But I hope that there is an air of not judging for things that are happening versus like creating awareness and conversation around how in a space of healthy relationship with food, body, mind, all that stuff, that it doesn't have to be the way that our culture is talking about it constantly. Okay. Um Another really common thing that people do around the holidays is to not eat like regularly throughout the day to save up room for that food later. And again, like if that's really what you want to do, whatever. Um, but it isn't something like as a dietitian, it's not something that is going to be beneficial like, health-wise, to do that, and so I just like to talk about that piece because I think it's coming from a place of trying to, like, not, quote, unquote, "overindulge," but when we restrict, it typically leads to binging, and that doesn't feel good, and it's okay, certainly, to feel overly full after a special meal or after any time, like, it's not inherently wrong to, quote, unquote, "overeat," but if you don't eat because you're trying to save room, that's essentially setting yourself up for that, and if it's truly the way you wanna enjoy Thanksgiving, um, meal and that feels right, that's fine, but it also is okay and encouraged to eat throughout the day, and that is not me saying that that would help you to eat less overall, because that is not my agenda or objective in giving nutrition advice ever, but I think that was something, at least in, my family in particular, and then once I began struggling with my eating disorder, and just a lot of my food rules, that felt like a big push to, like, not eat too much until that meal, just because of knowing that it contains things different in energy value than, other meals may. Um, there's a lot of concern about eating, enough in the day to gain weight, like that WebMD article that I had mentioned a few minutes ago, and just wanting to do some, like, myth busting around the fact that one day of anything is going to, like, for the most part, like, cause a long-term impact. Um, the reason I'm being hesitant is just because, um, as an eating disorder dietitian, I do really encourage patients that are trying to establish normal eating behaviors that every day does count. So I feel like that's a little bit of a caveat to my point here, but, um, in the sense of, like, being concerned that it's gonna cause a body change from one day of eating, that is not, like, a real thing that happens, and, again, being really careful because I don't want it to come across and sound like I would be disappointed in someone for, gaining weight from one day of eating, but it's more like we really blow this out of proportion, I think, and that fear mongering that happens around weight gain in the holidays is, um, I could almost guarantee more harmful than any impact to health from gaining weight around the holidays would be anyway. Um, another super, like, difficult part I think about navigating holidays in the world of diet culture is just the commentary on, bodies and food from other people, and it certainly may not be coming from a place of, trying to be malicious or harmful, but I think the impact can really be so much greater, and that's not something that you may know from someone who hasn't opened up maybe about their relationship with those things or hasn't felt, um, l like they've been able to advocate for that, especially in circumstances where, like, more distant relatives or, like, friends or just people are coming together for holiday gatherings and making those kinds of comments. Um, so just a reminder to keep your eyes, like, on your own plate and to keep to really think before you engage in commenting on someone's body either way, because it really reinforces, like, if you are complimenting someone on a changed appearance for weight loss, a lot of people talk about how, that person could have an eating disorder, that's really harmful, and that is 100% true, but it also just reaffirms that someone is more worthy because they're thinner, because we're congratulating it, we're noticing it, we're making it a thing. And while it is not your sole responsibility for what other people choose to do in regards to their body, um, it's never going to be helpful. And that's just a little encouragement not to try, excuse me, not to make those kinds of comments um, about bodies when you see people that you may not be around all the time or just ever in general. But I feel like that's a very common stressor this time of year.
Yeah, and just like you have to be so careful, like you were saying, just really thinking before you speak on anything, because you can do something you can start something that seems very complimentary and simple and safe, like, oh, this food dish was really good, and then someone's like, ah, yes, it was, and then you're like, it was so good that I ate X amount, and then you've gone and done it, and
Mhm.
it's just like there are so many really tough slippery slopes in terms of
Mhm.
the language around the Thanksgiving dinner table. And so, like, just trying your best to not accidentally attack somebody and trigger some trauma.
Yeah. And I think too on the other end of that is how do we engage in self-care and be self-protective in those instances where there are really triggering things happening from people that you may not feel comfortable talking to about these things or standing up for yourself, which we talk about a lot on this podcast of like you really have to gauge what's appropriate for that and what feels like something you can put energy into in that moment based on so many circumstances from like past history or just like currently what's going on and thinking of kind of a plan of action for how to be uh, well and if you're trying not to engage in maladaptive coping mechanisms, um, how to take care of yourself in ways that don't lead to that. And so that's what I want to shift gears a little bit into um, because I think it's not the most helpful thing to just like list off a bunch of things like do this instead because it's really helpful to be a little bit self-reflective, I think, of, like, what the individual circumstance may be, but I just wanna kinda throw some things out there and some examples of it, to help for anyone that feels like they need some support or just needed maybe a reminder, that that might be a good thing to, like, have a self-care plan in action, for situations like that. And so, um one thing that's coming to my mind, first is that when I, first started doing some work of digging into my trauma at the beginning of last year, I made a happy box, that was encouraged by my therapist, I believe, so that if things became, like, overwhelming so this is, like, a very heightened state of, like, being concerned about being triggered and needing to, like, calm down, so this might seem, like, pretty intense, but I think there are a lot of situations that come up around the holidays where we need to take a moment, for some self-care, but the happy box was a really cool thing, and I, like, traveled with it for a while when I was feeling like I was at a higher risk of that happening, and it was so the idea is that it's filled with things that are all positive, coping skills or tools. It can be, like, sensory tools to help, to kind of regulate and bring you back down to earth when things are just feeling super triggered and heightened, and so some things that I put in mine. I still have it, um, together. It just feels nice even though I haven't had to use it, in particular, that to take that box out in a while. It feels nice to, like, have that there as a reminder of the things that are so supportive. But, okay, what's in it? There's, some, uh, lavender, like, really nice smelling lotion, some tea bags because sipping a hot beverage can be very calming, decaf tea, in this scenario. Um, our wedding album is in there because it's a very, very small, thin book, and it's really nice to look through. Some pictures from a very happy day. I have a couple of cards in there because I'm a big words of affirmation person, just from people who I love and who love me that have written things. Some of them are just birthday cards, but just a few of those. I have a book in there that is by my favorite author, that is particularly like it's fiction, but really like a fantasy world story that she wrote, and so it's a little bit of escapism, but just a positive, distraction, from a author I love. And then I also put a card in there of activities that I like to do, like baking, um, and, like, getting outside and getting some fresh air, like doing a short meditation or things like that. Just, not all those things are always gonna be accessible in a moment, but just a reminder, of some of the things that can help with grounding. Um, and I also wrote on there, like, who some of my support people are so that in, particular moments of, like, feeling really shitty, it could be a self reminder of, like, to fact check almost of, like, catastrophizing what's going on and knowing, like, you do have these support people. So that might not be every single thing that's in there, but it's been a lovely tool, and I think, like, the way my brain works, and I always offer this to people, is to have things like that, whether it's just a note card or a note on your phone that reminds you of the things that help and can help feel grounding in the moment, because when we get heightened and flooded and upset, it can just be really hard to access some of that. So that's something I don't think every person, like, needs to go, like, create a happy box necessarily, but that's kind of my offering for a reminder to have a plan of action for some self-care and to really give yourself permission to step away, in moments, like, you don't have to just disappear without saying anything, because that might not be helpful, necessarily, but to just give space for that if it's needed.
Yeah,
Do you
and
have
that's
any
I think just you were saying like just in general, that you may not need you were saying that you may not need something like that for something as like nonchalant as Thanksgiving, but I would definitely like to hammer home that point that it's like it is definitely a time of like immense stress. I think for like everybody, whether or not it's
Mhm,
like whether or not at the end of the day you view it as necessary or it still is pretty stimulating for the brain. So like I think that's just like totally cool to normalize viewing the holiday season like that as something that is very
mhm,
stimulating and that you are
mhm,
it's so okay to go to whatever measures for like self-care. Um like totally.
mhm. Um, and as far as, like, speaking up around commentary about bodies and food, like a simple change of the subject, is very effective. So having, some things in mind ahead of time, I think is really helpful. Like if someone's making comments about your plate, it could be as like, "Oh, did you try Uncle blah blah blah's sweet potato casserole yet?" Like, just, like, have something, um, in your back pocket, and then regarding your body, I think that is even more, like, um individualized of an approach of how we would wanna go about that, but saying something along the lines of, um, like, if you wanna completely deflect and change the subject, like, maybe compliment if you like the shirt that that person is wearing, be like, "Oh, I really like your shirt today." Like, just, like, put it back on them, like, not talking about bodies, like, we're just talking about an article of clothing. Change the subject. If you feel like you want to, like, make a firmer boundary, with someone, like, I actually would really appreciate it if we didn't talk about my body right now. Um, and, it doesn't have to be, a mean or negative thing, and I think that in this particular instance that it's really important that we hold space for knowing that it is not our responsibility to, like, deal with someone if you set a boundary with them and they're not able to hold that because of feeling like, um, they did something wrong and it causing, like, them to become upset about a simple request, to be self-protective, and I think that that can be really hard to stand up for what you need because of that fear of, like, not knowing how someone may respond. So just a reminder, if someone gets upset with you for asking for that, that that is not on you, and it is totally appropriate to ask someone, not to do that. Um and as much information as you feel like sharing about why that's not helpful, um, like, is up to you, but I don't think we owe anyone that. If it's a more intimate relationship and that's gonna be something that has to be, like, a consistent, um, boundary that is worked on and, like, molded, I think then probably some more explanation is gonna be needed, but if it's someone that you don't see regularly, um that's great too. I've also found, excusing yourself to go use the restroom in an uncomfortable encounter with a relative you don't have a great like, a close relationship with to get out of that moment, like, that's also great because it's not literally just, like, running away, you're giving a reason, "Please excuse me, I need to run to the restroom," and I feel like it's probably unlikely that someone would be that set on whatever commentary they were making, that it's gonna be re-engaged in, I certainly hope not, so those are just a few things, to offer, and again, I would really encourage if this feels stressful, especially around, like, the space of protecting recovery, to have a conversation with a safe person, whether that's a friend, family member, a, a professional that you may work with, dietitian, therapist would be lovely. Um, just about some things that you could do just to have that plan in place. Unless you're just really super great at thinking of things off the top of your head. And then that improv is really wonderful too. Is there anything else that you want to add to that conversation, Nick?
No, no, I agree with everything you have said.
So I want to take a moment. I like sometimes I end our episodes in a really sassy way, but I just want to take a moment to um, extend a lot of compassion and hugs, if people like virtual hugs, to anyone who has lost a loved one. Um, or just anyone that they care about if you're grieving. Grief can be in such a wide variety of things and for things, but that can make the holidays more difficult. If you are struggling to have enough access to food to begin with or going through any financial difficulty, and this time of year really adds a strain of like trying to live up to a certain expectation of what is done and provided when basic needs are not being met. Um, just offering a lot of compassion to you and hope that you're not being too hard on yourself in that and that you're navigating that space um, in the most healing and healthy way that you can for yourself, getting the help that you need. If you're struggling with mental health this time of year, as so many of us do as it gets uh, darker more often, and the weather's changing in a lot of areas, that you are giving yourself compassion and hopefully speaking up if you need additional support, and that you're taking the time to rest. And yeah, just anyone struggling right now, or feeling extremely anxious because this is your first holiday after getting out of a treatment center for any type of substance use or for eating disorder recovery, and you're terrified of this. Just again, all the compassion and good vibes and good luck in these situations. And for anyone who is living their best life right now and has not a care in the world about the holidays, I think that is wonderful too. And I'm glad for you as well. So
Yeah,
happy Thanksgiving
and
to
I would like to
everyone who celebrates.
I agree, and I would like to say to those who are in a place where you're giving thanks, like if you're in a very privileged position where you are just celebrating all day, um, thanks is really cool. That's a really good thing to give. It breeds humility, but like
Mhm.
surplus is good to give away as well, in whatever form. And like Danielle said, like everybody on that list that she just read off can use something that if you're just celebrating all day, you have a surplus of, like in the sense of like more love. People need food. People need a lot of things. So like
Mhm.
totally just yeah. If you feel like you are in a place of privilege, just like use it. Um,
Yeah.
not a guilt trip at all. Just like yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, happy Thanksgiving. And um, next week will be the last episode of season one, before I go on uh, a break for my last approximate month or so before having my first child. Taking a break from the pod, ending this season, and then we will return sometime in the spring.
Woo.
So, talk to you guys soon.
See everyone.
Thank you for listening. Diet Culture is co produced by myself and my brother, Nick Lewis. You can keep up with what's going on with diet culture on my Instagram page at Dietitian Dani Cast. If you prefer to watch rather than just listen, check us out on YouTube, and we always love ratings and reviews if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for your support, and can't wait to talk to you next week.